In the heart of bustling Chicago, Blake Holt, a successful but lonely media CEO, walks past a lively street art festival when an 8-year-old girl calls out, "Dad, my picture!" Startled, Blake turns. The girl, Ella, holds up a chalk drawing of him. Her shy smile, her eyes, they stir something buried in his past. Blake hasn't seen Grace, his college love, in over 8 years. Their breakup? Rushed, messy, fueled by lies, especially one whispered by Blake's cousin Mark, who claimed Blake never wanted kids. But as Blake kneels to draw beside Ella, doubts creep in. Could she be? Grace, now a guarded single mother, keeps Blake at a distance. But secrets don't stay hidden. The truth crashes down. Mark faked a call to break them apart, just to seize control of Blake's studio shares. Haunted by lost time, Blake starts showing up for Ella. He cancels meetings, funds a chalk art class for kids, tries again with Grace. Slowly, a family begins to form. But redemption comes with confrontation. Blake must face Mark and his own regrets. Will Grace forgive him? Will Ella finally get to call him Dad for real? And as chalk dust swirls at the street festival's close, can Blake finally color a future he almost lost? Subscribe to see this heartfelt story unfold, one stroke at a time. The sun gleamed off the glass facade of Holt Media, casting reflections onto the busy Chicago sidewalk. Blake Holt, 39, exited the building in a tailored navy suit, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, measured. "No, cancel the Dubai pitch. We'll reschedule. I need the board to trust me, not fear me." He hung up, pocketed the phone, and exhaled slowly. The noise of the city wrapped around him, honking horns, the clatter of bike tires, music from a street performer. Blake turned the corner and stepped into a crowd gathered for the city's annual street art festival. Vibrant murals spilled onto pavement. Artists crouched beside buckets of chalk. Children ran through the color with squeals of joy. Blake moved past them, almost smiling, when a small voice sliced through the noise. "Dad, my picture!" He froze. Blake turned. A little girl with chestnut hair and timid brown eyes sat cross-legged on the sidewalk, chalk in hand. She pointed to a drawing, a man in a blue suit, just like his, standing beneath a TV tower. "Dad," she repeated, softer now. "It's you." Blake stared at her, heart skipping. His lips parted, but no sound came. The girl blinked, puzzled, then looked down, rubbing the chalk into the concrete as if erasing what she said. A woman's voice called from across the plaza. "Ella, don't run off again!" Blake turned. The voice belonged to Grace. His chest tightened. Same long dark hair, same steady walk. She moved toward the girl, toward Ella, with cautious steps. Grace stopped short when she saw him. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. Not shock, not joy, just guarded wariness. "Blake," she said, her tone unreadable. Blake swallowed hard. "Grace. She called me Dad." Grace stepped protectively between him and Ella. "She's just drawing. Kids imagine things. But she drew me. She draws lots of people." Ella looked between them, sensing the tension. She tucked the chalk behind her back. Grace took her daughter's hand. "I didn't know you were still in Chicago," Blake said quietly. "I stayed for work, and for her." "For her?" he echoed. Ella tugged at her mom's arm. "Can we go now?" Grace nodded. "We should." Blake stepped forward. "Wait, please." Grace paused, jaw tight. "Why now, Blake?" He shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe because I saw her. Maybe because I regret walking away without ever asking why." She didn't answer. Ella reached into her small canvas bag and held something out. A piece of colored chalk, blue, like his suit. You can draw, too, she said quietly. Blake hesitated, then knelt beside her. On the gray sidewalk, he traced a line beside hers, adding to the tower she started. The chalk trembled in his hand. Grace watched in silence. When they stood, Ella smiled. It's better with two people. Blake looked down at her, breath caught in his throat. Yeah, it really is. Grace pulled Ella close. We have to go. Blake nodded slowly. Will I see you again? Grace didn't answer directly. Come to 12th and Maple, tomorrow, 4 p.m., if you really want answers. Then she walked away, her hand wrapped around Ella's. Blake stood still, watching the blue chalk dust cling to his fingers. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, and for the first time, the past didn't seem so far behind. The next afternoon, Blake stood at the corner of 12th and Maple, hands buried in the pockets of his coat. The wind carried the scent of roasted peanuts from a nearby cart and the distant hum of traffic. Round him, the neighborhood buzzed with its usual rhythm. Kids on bikes, dogs barking from balconies, the faint clink of dishes from a cafe window. But Blake wasn't hearing any of it. He was waiting. Then he saw them, Grace, walking slightly ahead, holding Ella's hand. The little girl wore a hoodie with chalk stains smudged on the sleeves. Her other hand clutched a small paper bag. They reached him, and Grace gave a curt nod. You came, she said. I said I would. Ella looked up at him shyly. I brought my chalk, in case you wanted to draw again. Blake's throat tightened. I'd like that. Maybe later. Grace motioned toward a bench near the small park. Let's sit. They crossed quietly and took seats beneath an old tree whose branches creaked gently in the breeze. Blake watched Grace, trying to read the expression on her face. Calm, but guarded. Why now? She asked finally. You haven't called in years. Blake looked at Ella, then back to Grace. Because yesterday, your daughter called me Dad, and I saw myself in her drawing. Grace's jaw tensed. She doesn't know anything. I never told her. Why? She sighed, staring straight ahead. Because I was told you didn't want kids, that you'd made it clear. Your career came first. Blake frowned. Who told you that? Grace turned, eyes hard. Mark! The name hit Blake like a slap. Mark said that? Yes. He called after we broke up. Said you'd moved on, that you were relieved there'd be no baby to slow you down. Blake shook his head slowly, disbelief washing over him. Grace, I never knew. I thought you left because you didn't want the mess, the timing, me. I waited, Blake. I tried calling. I left messages. You never answered. I never got them, he said, his voice low. Mark handled all my calls back then. He filtered everything when I took over the studio. Ella sat between them, silent, scribbling something on a napkin with a broken blue crayon. Neither adult noticed. You had a right to know, Grace whispered, her voice trembling. But by the time I figured out the truth, I didn't want to drag you into it. Ella wasn't a mistake. She's my light. But I had to protect her. Blake ran a hand down his face, overwhelmed. I missed 8 years. Ella suddenly looked up and held out the napkin. Look what I made, she said quietly. Blake took it. A child's drawing. Him, Grace, and Ella standing under a giant heart. The son had a smiling face. His figure held 2 things, Ella's hand and a piece of chalk. He swallowed hard. This is beautiful. I used the blue from yesterday, she said. It's my favorite now. Grace watched, something soft flickering in her eyes. I never stopped loving you, Blake said quietly, not breaking eye contact. But I let someone else tell me what you felt. Grace looked down. And I let someone else tell me what you didn't. Ella tilted her head. Do you like being in my pictures? Blake smiled, the sadness still there, but warmer now. I do. Very much. They sat there a while longer, the silence between them shifting. No longer sharp, but full of possibility. When they finally stood to leave, Ella reached into her bag and handed Blake the stub of her blue crayon. "Here," she said, "so you don't forget." Blake knelt and accepted it like a sacred gift. "I won't," he promised. As they walked away down the street, Blake looked at the crayon in his palm. So small, but bright, just like the future he'd almost lost. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows of Blake's office as he sat behind his desk turning the stub of blue crayon over in his fingers. Outside, the city buzzed, but inside the silence was thick, weighted with memory, with questions he couldn't shake. A knock at the door broke the quiet. "Come in," he said. His assistant, Jamie, peeked in. "Your cousin Mark's here. Says it's urgent." Blake's stomach turned slightly. "Send him in." Mark strode in with his usual swagger, pressed suit, confident smirk. "You've been hard to reach, cousin." Blake leaned back in his chair, studying him. "Been busy." Mark dropped into the chair across from him. "Busy chasing old ghosts?" Blake didn't flinch. "I saw Grace." Mark's smile faltered for half a second. "Grace? After all these years? Thought that chapter was closed." Blake's voice lowered. "You told her I didn't want kids, that I was relieved." Mark blinked. "She said that?" "She said you said that." Mark chuckled, then shrugged. "Blake, it was a decade ago. Things were complicated. You screened my calls, my messages. You kept me away from her." Mark's tone shifted. "I protected you. You were about to throw away Holt Media chasing some starving artist with a baby." Blake stood, his jaw tightening. "You lied to both of us." Mark stood too, calm but cold. "And look where you are now. CEO, untouchable, you're welcome." Blake's eyes burned. "She's not a ghost, Mark. She's the mother of my child." Mark adjusted his cuffs. "And that's your problem now, isn't it?" Blake turned away, fists clenched. "Get out." Mark didn't argue, just walked out, leaving a tension behind that didn't fade. That evening, Blake stood outside Grace's apartment, holding an umbrella over his head. He knocked gently. The door opened to reveal Grace, hair damp, Ella peeking from behind her. "I didn't expect you," Grace said. "I needed to see her," Blake said softly, and "I needed to see you." Ella slipped past Grace and held up her hand. "I still have the red chalk. Want to draw?" Blake smiled. "Yeah, I'd like that." They stepped out to the sidewalk, wet but clear. Ella dropped to her knees and began sketching on the dry patches of concrete. Blake knelt beside her, umbrella resting nearby, and joined in. He drew a small house with flowers out front. Ella added a cat. Grace watched from the porch, arms folded, but not as tense as before. "She's talented," Blake said, glancing at her. "And she's got your focus." "She gets lost in it," Grace replied. "It's how she copes." Blake drew a little figure beside the house, a girl with pigtails. Then he handed Ella the blue crayon. "Your turn." Ella smiled and drew a man beside her drawing. Suit, tie, familiar shoulders. "That's you," she said. Blake's voice caught. "Why do you draw me, Ella?" She looked up, serious. "Because I hoped one day I'd find you." He glanced at Grace, who looked away, blinking fast. "She doesn't forget faces," Grace said softly, "even ones she's never met." A long pause. Then Blake said, "I want to be in her life, not just for today, for good." Grace met his eyes. "It's not just about showing up, Blake. I know. That's why I'm here." Ella looked between them, sensing something important. "Are you staying for dinner?" she asked. Grace hesitated. Blake said gently, "Only if it's okay." Grace nodded slowly. "We have soup." Ella clapped. Can I draw on the napkins again? Blake laughed. Only if I get to keep one this time. As they headed inside, Ella ran ahead, giggling. Blake glanced down at the chalk on the sidewalk. Wet now, but still bright. Bright enough to see a path forward. The next morning, the studio floor buzzed with movement. Interns scurried between editing bays, voices low, headphones in. Blake walked past them all, his steps slower than usual, head full of Ella's quiet voice and Grace's guarded eyes. He entered his glass-walled corner office and closed the door. Outside, Lake Michigan glimmered beneath a gray sky, but his attention stayed on the folder in his hand, a background report his assistant had quietly pulled on Mark. Blake flipped it open. Bank records, communications. A flagged transaction dated 8 years ago, $250,000 wired from Holt Media's discretionary fund to an unnamed LLC. The timing matched. His phone rang. Blake Holt. Sir, said Jamie. There's someone from the Street Art Council in the lobby, a woman named Leona. She said you reached out? Blake paused. Send her up. Minutes later, Leona stepped inside. Gray curls, paint-stained jacket, eyes alive with conviction. Mr. Holt, I was surprised by your message. You said you wanted to sponsor a children's chalk workshop? Blake gestured for her to sit. Yes, I want to start a Saturday program, free for kids. Sidewalk art, public spaces, maybe host it near the West Loop. Leona tilted her head. Why the sudden interest? Blake looked at the blue crayon stub on his desk. Because someone small reminded me what color can do to a sidewalk, and what a sidewalk can do to a child's world. Leona smiled. We'll make it happen. That evening, Grace opened her front door to find Blake on the steps again. No suit this time, just jeans and a soft jacket, holding a to-go box and a small sketch pad. Thought maybe I could earn my way back with dumplings and a drawing lesson. Grace raised an eyebrow. Dumplings might work. They sat at her small dining table, Ella Huorsia, kneeling beside them, tongue between her teeth as she filled a blank page with pink chalk flowers. Blake held up his own sketch pad, where he'd drawn a simple dog, lopsided, tongue sticking out. Ella giggled. That looks like a jelly bean with legs. Blake laughed. I'm rusty. You're trying, Grace murmured. They ate slowly, the clink of chopsticks and quiet conversation filling the space. Blake glanced at Grace. She's brilliant, Grace. You've done so much. Her voice softened. She deserves the best of me. She deserves the best of both of us, Blake replied. I'm not asking to rewrite everything. I just want a seat at her table, even if I have to earn it one bite at a time. Grace studied him. Do you mean that? He nodded. I've already started something, a weekend art workshop, for kids like her. Ella perked up. Really? Can I come? That's the plan, Blake said, smiling. Grace leaned back, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. You're doing all this because of her? Because of both of you, he said. They sat in silence for a beat. Then Ella slid her sketchpad across the table. A drawing. Grace, Blake, and Ella standing beneath a tree with rainbow leaves. All three were holding chalk. I call it Family Drawing Day, Ella announced proudly. Blake stared at it, his chest tight. Can I keep this? Ella nodded. But you have to put it somewhere you see every day. I will. He folded the page gently, like it was a contract written in color. Grace didn't speak, but her eyes lingered on Blake as he tucked the drawing into his coat. And, for the first time, her look didn't hold warning. It held wonder, maybe even hope. The following Saturday, the first chalk workshop opened at the West Side Plaza. Rows of bright buckets filled with colored chalk lined the sidewalk. Folding tables held juice boxes, blank sketch pads, and simple snacks. Kids of all ages darted between the paint-splashed curbs, laughter echoing off the surrounding brick buildings. Blake knelt beside Ella, helping her arrange her supplies. "You think they'll like it?" he asked. Ella nodded. "They already do. Look." He turned and saw a boy drawing flames around his scooter tires, a girl sketching a purple lion on the pavement. Blake smiled. "You were right. Chalk makes the street feel alive." Grace stood nearby, arms folded, watching with cautious pride. Leona, the art director, approached. "We've got 30 kids signed up, more on the way. This space, what you started, it's already something." Blake nodded. "It's not about me. It's about giving them something to hold on to." Just then, Ella tugged his sleeve. "Can I show you my corner?" He followed her to a quiet patch of sidewalk under a maple tree. There, outlined in blue chalk, was a house with 3 windows. "This is ours," she said softly. "You, me, and Mommy." Blake swallowed. "It's beautiful. I want to draw inside next time, not just outside." He crouched beside her. "Inside where?" She looked up. "Your house." Blake blinked, then smiled. "We'll work on that." Suddenly, a voice interrupted the quiet. "Well, this is cozy." They both turned. Mark stood across the plaza, arms crossed, sunglasses glinting. Grace immediately stepped forward. "What are you doing here?" Mark gave a smirk. "Just wanted to see what Blake's been throwing money at lately." Blake stood tall. "You're not welcome here." Mark shrugged. "You really think playing sidewalk babysitter fixes what you walked away from?" Blake's voice was steady. "No, but it's a start." Ella clutched her chalk. "He's not a babysitter." Mark glanced down at her. "You must be Ella." Grace stepped between them. "Leave, now." Mark held up his hands. "Hey, relax. Just came to say hello. But let me leave you with this. Don't dig too deep, Blake. Some things are better left buried." He turned and walked off, disappearing into the crowd. Grace let out a slow breath. Blake looked shaken, but calm. "He's nervous. He knows I'm getting close to something." Grace nodded. "He looked smug when I told him I was pregnant, almost relieved." Blake glanced at her. "And I was the fool who believed he had my best interest in mind." Ella looked up. "Is he a bad guy?" Blake crouched again, eye level. "He made bad choices, ones that hurt people." Ella nodded solemnly. "Then don't let him near our house." Blake gave her a soft smile. "I won't." As the sun dipped lower, the kids gathered in a circle, showing off their finished drawings. A mural had formed, waves, suns, trees, stars, and in the center, Ella's blue house with 3 windows and a heart on the door. Blake sat beside Grace on the bench, both quiet, watching their daughter beam as other kids admired her art. "She belongs here," Grace said. "And you? You don't look out of place either." Blake turned to her. "I want to make sure she always feels safe and seen." Grace hesitated, then rested her hand briefly over his. "She's getting that now," she said softly. "Just don't disappear again." "Won't." Their hands stayed for a moment longer before Ella ran over, her fingers smudged with every color imaginable. "Daddy," she said, holding up a new sketch. "Look what I made." He took it. 3 stick figures on a porch swing, all smiling, all together. A breeze carried chalk dust across the pavement, and for the first time, Blake felt the ground beneath him wasn't shifting anymore. It was settling, bright, steady, and real. It was a quiet Tuesday evening when Grace knocked on Blake's door. He opened it to find her standing on the front step, arms crossed, a folder tucked beneath one arm. Ella wasn't with her. Blake stepped aside. "Is everything okay?" Grace walked in without answering. Her eyes scanned the apartment. Neat, modern, but not cold. A few framed sketches from the workshop now lined one wall. Ella's latest drawing, a sun with 3 smiling faces, was magneted to the fridge. "I need to talk," Grace said. Blake nodded. "I'm listening." She held up the folder. "This is everything. The birth certificate, school records, medical files, and a letter I wrote years ago that I never sent. He took it gently and laid it on the table. I believed Mark, she said quietly. I let him poison something good, and I convinced myself I could do it alone. You did, Blake said. You raised a brilliant little girl. Grace shook her head. But I also raised her to think someone important didn't want her, and that was never true. Blake's voice softened. She still asks questions. I think she's waiting to see if I'll stay long enough to answer them. She told me you framed her drawing, Grace said, glancing at the wall. That meant something to her. She's teaching me how to show up, Blake said. Grace sighed. So, here it is. You want to be part of her life? Then be ready to fight for it. Blake frowned. What do you mean? She's not officially yours. No court papers, no name on the certificate. If something ever happened, legally, you'd have no right. Blake's chest tightened. You're saying custody? Grace nodded. Shared, maybe, if that's what we decide, but the system won't just hand her to you because she drew you a picture. Blake looked down at the folder. I want to do this the right way. Grace stepped closer. Then prepare for the mess. Lawyers, background checks, questions about your past. I'm not scared of that, he said. I'm scared of losing her again. Grace's eyes softened. Then don't give them a reason. The next morning, Blake sat with a family attorney. Her glasses perched low on her nose as she flipped through the documents. No name on the birth certificate, no paternity test, no legal link at all. I understand, Blake said. You'll need DNA confirmation, psychological evaluations, home inspections. It won't be simple. Blake looked her in the eye. Do what it takes. She paused. You sure this isn't about guilt? He didn't blink. It's about her. That night, Blake knocked on Grace's apartment again. Ella opened the door this time. Hi, Daddy. The word still shook him. He knelt down. Can I show you something? She nodded. He held out a new box of chalk, every shade she loved, but with her name stamped on the side of each stick in tiny silver letters. Ella's eyes lit up. You got these for me? He smiled. For the artist in the family. She grabbed his hand. Come draw. They sat on the porch steps under the porch light, Ella sketching a rainbow sun, Blake trying to match her curves with his clumsy lines. Grace watched from the doorway. Mommy, look! She held up her drawing, a picture of their family again, this time with a house behind them and the words, We belong written in crooked pink letters. Grace's breath caught. Blake looked over. She's already claiming us. Grace nodded. Then let's make sure no one can take that away. In the fading light, Ella drew a border of hearts around the picture. One stroke at a time, their family was becoming permanent. Blake stood outside Grace's apartment with a folder in his hand and nerves in his chest. Inside were the DNA test results, proof of what his heart already knew. Ella was his daughter. He knocked. Grace opened the door, her face unreadable until she saw the folder. Then she nodded once and stepped aside. They sat at the kitchen table. Ella was at the window seat, quietly drawing a city skyline with colored chalk on black paper. The light from the setting sun spilled across her work. Blake handed the folder to Grace. She opened it slowly, scanned the contents, and let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it for 8 years. It's official, he said. I'm her father. Grace looked over at Ella. She already knows that. I needed the world to know too. Ella turned, chalk on her cheek. What are you talking about? Grace smiled gently. Daddy had to prove to some people that he's really your dad. On paper. Ella frowned. But that's silly. I already know he is. Blake chuckled. Sometimes grown-ups need a little extra proof. Ella nodded, satisfied, and went back to her drawing. Grace turned to Blake. What now? I want to know everything I missed, he said. From the start. She hesitated, then stood and disappeared into the hallway. When she returned, she held a worn shoebox. Inside were scraps of Ella's life, photos, birthday cards, finger paintings, a tiny hospital bracelet. Blake lifted each piece gently, studying them like rare artifacts. "This was her first word," Grace said, pointing to a picture of Ella holding a spoon. "No," Blake read, laughing. "Fierce, from the beginning," Grace said. They smiled together, the tension slowly melting. Then Blake asked, "Why didn't you try again? After the first calls?" Grace's eyes dropped. "I did. I sent a letter to the studio. No reply. Then a voicemail." Blake froze. "What number did you use?" She rattled it off. His stomach dropped. "That was Mark's private line. I gave it to him to filter my calls during a merger." Grace's voice sharpened. "You mean he intercepted that too?" Blake stood. "He didn't just lie. He buried every attempt." They were quiet a long moment. Then Ella walked over, holding up her new drawing. "This is the city we live in. I made the windows look like stars." Blake crouched down. "It's amazing. I love the colors." "It's almost finished," she said, "but I need help drawing the two people on the rooftop." "Which two?" he asked. "You and Mommy, watching the city, holding hands." Blake looked up at Grace, surprised. Grace's expression was soft but cautious. "Can I?" he asked her gently. She gave the smallest nod. He took the blue chalk she handed him and carefully drew a figure beside the one Ella had already outlined. Ella watched closely. "That's good. You made yourself taller than Mommy." Blake laughed. "That's just the angle." Grace stepped over and drew the last hand. Her line met his on the paper. Ella clapped. "Perfect." Later, as night settled outside, Grace walked Blake to the door. "You're rebuilding something here," she said, "but I need you to understand something." "I'm listening." "I don't want promises. I want presence, even when it's hard." Blake nodded slowly. "I'm done disappearing." She looked him in the eye. "Then be ready, because the next chapter won't be written in chalk." Blake smiled, touching the paper skyline in his pocket. "Maybe not, but it'll start there." And, as he walked away down the dim hallway, the dust of Ella's colors still on his hands, Blake felt something shift. Something permanent beginning to take hold. The next morning, Blake entered his office earlier than usual, the city still stretching awake beyond the high-rise glass. He moved straight to the server archive room. Quiet, cold, and locked. He typed in his credentials. The door clicked open. Inside, rows of drives blinked silently. He walked to the old backup servers, hands steady, jaw tight. He pulled up the archive logs from 8 years ago. Voicemails, emails, scanned letters, dozens flagged under "filtered by Mark." Blake's heart sank. One by one, he opened them. Grace's voice filled the room from an old recording. "Blake, I'm scared. I don't know if I should tell you this, but I think you have a right to know." Another email. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I thought you already had." Dozens of attempts, all blocked, all hidden. He sat down, breathing shallowly, fury creeping up his spine. Then he saw it, an internal memo, time-stamped weeks before their breakup. Mark had forwarded Grace's messages to his private account, marked them irrelevant to operations, and diverted them to spam. And the final twist, a document transferring voting power on Holt Media shares from Blake to Mark during a crisis absence, signed under the pretense that Blake was distracted by a toxic personal relationship. Blake stood slowly, hands in fists. Mark hadn't just kept him from Grace. He'd done it to steal his voice. That evening, Blake drove to Grace's apartment. She opened the door, startled by his expression. "Is Ella here?" he asked. "She's at her friend's house." "Good," he said, stepping inside. "I found everything. He dropped the printed documents on her table. Grace scanned them, face paling. He read everything. He kept it all from you. He didn't just sabotage us. He used it to manipulate the company. I gave him power because I thought I was losing control. You were never the problem, she whispered. Blake leaned on the table, breathing hard. I want to expose him, publicly, but I need your help. Grace looked up. What do you mean? You still have that letter, the one you wrote but never sent? She hesitated, then nodded. I do. Can I read it? And can I show it to the board? Her eyes widened. That's personal. Blake's voice softened. It's the truth. And the only way to undo what he did is to shine light where he cast shadows. She studied him. You're not doing this for revenge, are you? No, he said. I'm doing it for Ella. So she grows up knowing the truth matters, even if it's hard. Grace finally nodded. Okay, but only if I'm there when you read it. 2 days later, Blake stood in the boardroom of Holt Media. 12 executives stared back at him, some confused, others concerned. Mark sat near the head, calm, legs crossed, pen tapping rhythmically. Blake cleared his throat. Before we begin quarterly strategy, there's something I need to share. It's personal, but it affects all of us. He clicked the remote. The screen lit up with Grace's letter, scanned and dated. Mark's smile faded. Blake spoke clearly. This letter was written to me 8 years ago. I never received it, because someone here intercepted it, along with dozens of other messages. That person redirected personal files, voicemails, legal notices, all to gain control of this company, under false pretenses. He turned to Mark. You forged a power transfer while I was grieving the loss of someone I didn't even know I'd lost. Murmurs rippled through the room. Mark's voice rose. That's a bold accusation. Blake pulled out the memo trail. Here's your digital signature, time-stamped, cross-referenced. The room went still. Then Grace stepped forward from the doorway. I wrote that letter, she said. I tried for months to reach him. I thought he abandoned me, but it was a lie, and that lie destroyed a family. Mark stood, flustered. This is absurd. Blake cut him off. You're done. And with that, the board voted, unanimous. Mark was removed, stripped of authority, his name erased from power. As he stormed out, Blake turned to Grace. She simply said, Now Ella knows. And outside, beyond the glass, the sky bloomed orange like a new beginning. A week after the boardroom fallout, the chalk workshop gathered more kids than ever. The plaza buzzed with laughter, streaks of color stretching across the pavement like wild rainbows. Ella stood at the center, her sleeves rolled up, instructing a younger boy on how to shade clouds with soft edges. Blake watched from a few steps away, arms crossed, smile quiet. Grace walked up beside him. She's found her space. Blake nodded. She's not the only one. She glanced at him. How's the studio handling everything? Surprisingly smooth, he said. The board's rebalancing. But I stepped back from 2 expansion deals. Told them I'd rather invest in something closer to home. Grace raised a brow. You mean this? I mean this, Blake said, gesturing to the children drawing castles and suns on the warm concrete. And something bigger. A permanent space, real walls, a roof, an art center for kids who've never had one. Grace looked at him, surprised. That's a huge shift. He turned to her. I missed years I'll never get back, but I can build something that helps other kids feel seen and safe. Just then, Ella ran over, chalk on her cheeks and palms. Daddy, we finished the mural. Blake crouched to her level. Show me. She grabbed his hand and tugged him forward. At the far end of the plaza, a giant mural stretched 10 feet wide. At the center, 3 figures, a tall man, a woman with long hair, and a girl between them, holding both their hands. Blake's throat tightened. That's us. Ella beamed. And look! She pointed to a building in the background, labeled in bright green, Ella's Chalk House. Grace laughed softly. She already named it. Blake knelt again, voice thick. You did all this? Ella nodded. Me, Noah, Sam, and that new girl with the pink boots. We all worked together, but I made the letters. Grace looked down at him. You're really going to build it? I already bought the lot, Blake said. It's near the school. I met with an architect this morning. I want it open by spring. Ella tilted her head. Will there be chalk inside too? He grinned. Only if you're the creative director. She jumped in place, arms wide. Yes, Grace laughed. You may have just hired an 8-year-old. I've made worse decisions, Blake said. They walked together through the plaza, Blake holding Ella's left hand, Grace her right. People waved. One father thanked Blake for bringing his daughter out of her shell. Another offered to donate supplies. Blake paused beneath a tree near the edge of the plaza. A little girl sat alone, watching the crowd but not joining. Her fingers toyed with a piece of broken chalk. He approached slowly and crouched beside her. Want to draw with us? She shook her head. Okay, he said, and pulled a fresh piece of blue chalk from his pocket. Mind if I draw next to you? She shrugged. He sketched a small flower, crooked, silly. The girl smiled. Grace and Ella watched from a distance. Ella leaned close. He's good at talking to the quiet ones. Grace smiled. He used to be one. Later that evening, Blake sat on the porch steps of the Grace's apartment while Ella scribbled beside him on the sidewalk. She drew a large heart, then handed him a pink stick. You do the name, she said. He bent low and wrote carefully, Ella's Art Center. Then he paused, looked up at Grace standing in the doorway. You okay with that name? Grace nodded. It's perfect. And, for the first time in his life, Blake felt like he wasn't running a company or chasing time. He was coloring in the lines of a future that finally made sense, one that belonged to all three of them. Late Sunday morning, Grace opened the door with her hair still damp from the shower. Blake stood there, smiling, holding a rolled-up piece of paper wrapped in a purple ribbon. You're early, she said. I wanted to give her this in person. Ella peeked from behind her mother's legs. What is it? Blake knelt and held it out. Something for you. Open it. She sat cross-legged on the floor, untying the ribbon with careful fingers. As she unrolled it, her eyes grew wide. It was a blueprint, a colorful rendering of a building shaped like a giant chalk box. The letters across the roof read, Ella's Art Center. Her mouth dropped open. This is real? Blake nodded. Construction starts next month. Ella hugged the drawing to her chest. I want to live there. Grace laughed. Let's start with visiting on weekends. Ella jumped up and hugged Blake tight, arms around his neck. Thank you, Daddy. Blake's voice cracked. You're welcome, sweetheart. They spent the afternoon at the park. Blake pushed Ella on the swing while Grace watched from a bench under a tree. The fall air was crisp, golden leaves spinning in the breeze. I don't think she stopped smiling, Grace said as Blake joined her. I don't think I have either, he replied. Grace looked at him, thoughtful. You've changed. I've had help, he said, watching Ella trace imaginary lines in the air. Grace hesitated, then asked, When the building's done, what happens to us? Blake turned to her. I don't know, but I want to find out. She looked away, then back. I'm not afraid anymore. Not like I was. Good, he said softly, because neither am I. That night, back at Grace's apartment, Ella brought out her sketch pad. Can I show you something I've been working on? Blake and Grace sat beside her on the floor. Ella opened the book to a full-page drawing, a sunset over a city skyline, 3 stick figures holding hands and a chalk rainbow arcing across the page. In the corner, she'd written, My family. Grace traced her fingers along the paper. This is beautiful, baby. Blake stared at it, speechless. Ella tapped the chalk rainbow. This means even if bad stuff happens, we can color over it and make it better. Blake pulled her into his lap. You've got that exactly right. Just then, the doorbell rang. Grace opened it to find a courier with an envelope. She signed for it, confused, then opened the seal. Her face tightened. What is it? Blake asked. She handed it to him silently. Inside, a legal challenge. Filed by Mark. Petitioning for a financial review of Holt Media's charitable assets. Accusing Blake of diverting funds into a personal project under a false beneficiary name. Ella's name. Blake stood still. He's trying to take this from her. Grace's voice hardened. From all of us. Ella looked up. What's wrong? Blake crouched beside her. Someone who used to work with me doesn't want me helping kids like you. He's trying to stop the art center. Ella's eyes welled. But it's my place. Blake touched her cheek. And I'll fight for it. Grace stood beside him. We both will. That night, Blake stayed late. Ella fell asleep on the couch, curled up with her chalk-stained fingers resting on her sketch pad. Grace covered her with a blanket. Blake watched, silent. Grace turned. We won't let him win. Blake nodded. We'll color over him too. She smiled, tired but certain. And just like Ella had drawn, a new rainbow was beginning to form, even if they'd have to fight to finish it. The next morning, the first thing Blake did was pick up the phone. I want every dollar going into the art center accounted for, he told his finance lead. Transparent, public, audit ready. The voice on the other end stammered. You think this is going to trial? Blake's voice was firm. No, I think it's going to make a point. He hung up, grabbed the pink chalk Ella had left on his desk and slipped it into his coat pocket like a quiet promise. By midweek, reporters had picked up the court filing. Headlines popped up. CEO's chalk project under fire. Family ties turn ugly at Holt Media. Even who really owns Ella's art center. Grace sat with Blake at her kitchen table, flipping through the articles. This is what he wants, she said. Confusion, doubt, people questioning your intentions. Blake looked at Ella, curled up on the floor, coloring a giant dragon with wings made of stars. He's not going to erase this, Blake said. Ella looked up. Erase? What? Blake smiled gently. Your wings. She beamed and went back to coloring. Grace squeezed his hand under the table. We'll handle this, but we need a real response. Something public, from you. He nodded. Then I'll say it in the only language I know, storytelling. 2 days later, Blake stood at a podium outside the construction site. Behind him, the steel framework of Ella's art center rose from the ground like a promise in progress. Reporters, parents, kids from the chalk workshop, all gathered to hear what he'd say. Blake adjusted the mic. When I was a kid, no one ever asked me what I saw when I closed my eyes. No one asked what I'd draw if given a blank sidewalk. And maybe that's why it took me so long to realize. Color changes everything. He pulled something from his coat pocket, Ella's pink chalk. This was given to me by an 8-year-old who believes that with enough imagination, you can fix anything, even a broken past. He held it up. This isn't just chalk. It's a symbol of what we build when we believe in each other. He turned, pointing to the half-built center. Every dollar, every brick, every color, publicly documented, fully transparent. This isn't a vanity project. It's a restoration of trust, of family, of possibility. The crowd clapped. Grace, standing beside Ella, wiped away a tear. Blake looked directly into the cameras. To those questioning my motives, look around. This isn't for me. It's for them. Later that evening, Grace stood in Blake's office, watching the speech replay on his laptop. You were brilliant, she said. I just told the truth. Grace turned to him. Ella's going to grow up knowing what integrity looks like, because she saw it in you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the pink chalk again. "She gave me this the day the lawsuit arrived. Said we could color over anything." Grace smiled, eyes soft. She was right. Just then, Ella burst into the room, holding a new drawing. "Mommy, Daddy, look!" She held it high. 3 people, herself, Blake, and Grace, standing in front of the completed art center. A banner waved above them. "Open to all. Our first day there," she said proudly. Blake knelt down. "We'll hang this in the front window." Ella nodded. "So everyone knows it's ours." He hugged her close. "They will." Grace joined them, wrapping her arms around both. Outside, a few remaining streaks of pink and gold colored the sky. Inside, a single piece of chalk sat on the desk, bright, bold, and untouched, waiting for the next story to begin. It was raining in Chicago the day Blake confronted Mark for the last time. He stepped into the private club where Mark was seated near the window, sipping an espresso like nothing had changed. The room was quiet, all dark wood and whispered conversations. Mark didn't look up. "Didn't expect you to come alone." Blake pulled out a chair across from him. "Didn't need anyone else?" Mark gave a thin smile. "So, what now? Another speech? Another mural?" "No." Blake slid a folder across the table. "Evidence. Wire transfers. Intercepted messages. Every manipulation you orchestrated, documented, and time-stamped." Mark flicked it open, glancing quickly before closing it with a sigh. "You've gone sentimental. You used to be smarter." "No," Blake said calmly. "I used to be blind." Mark leaned back. "And what do you want now? Public apology? Asset return?" "I want you to disappear," Blake said. "Permanently. Withdraw your petition, forfeit your shares, and walk. Quietly. Or I go public. Everything." Mark's jaw clenched. "You'd burn the family name?" "You already did," Blake replied. "I'm just scrubbing off the soot." Mark stood. "You always were soft underneath the suit. Guess Ella gets that." Blake rose too. "If you ever speak her name again, you'll regret it." They stared each other down. Then Mark, without another word, grabbed the folder and left. Blake stood there for a moment, letting the storm outside match the one in his chest. That evening, Grace opened the door to find Blake soaked to the bone, eyes tired but peaceful. "It's done," he said. She let him in. He dropped everything? Gone. No more lawsuit? No more leverage. Grace closed the door behind him. "And the center?" "Still ours," Blake said. "Still Ella's." Ella peeked from the hallway, holding a cup of hot cocoa. "Why are you wet?" Blake smiled. "Because sometimes the storm's the only way to clean up a mess." She giggled and handed him the mug. "I made this for you. Mommy helped." He knelt, took it gratefully. "Thank you, sweetheart." Then she added shyly, "We finished my room today." Blake raised a brow. "Your room?" Grace smiled. "At the new place." Ella nodded. "You should see it. There's a window shaped like a paintbrush." Later that night, the 3 of them stood in Ella's future bedroom at the art center. The walls were freshly painted soft lavender. A chalkboard ran the length of one wall, already filled with tiny sketches, stars, suns, and stick figures holding hands. Ella added a new drawing, a heart with 3 names inside: Ella, Mommy, Daddy. Blake stared at it. "Can we keep this one forever?" Ella nodded. "It's permanent chalk." He laughed. "That's not a thing." She grinned. "It is now." Grace leaned against the doorway. "You really did it, Blake." He turned to her. "We did." As they stood there in the gentle hum of new beginnings, Blake reached into his coat pocket and took out the pink chalk Ella had given him weeks ago. He held it out to her. "This one started everything. Want to put it somewhere safe?" Ella thought, then walked to the wall and gently pressed the chalk into a tiny glass shadow box they'd hung beside the door. "Now it can never break," she whispered. Grace wrapped her arm around Blake's. "Neither can we." Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, a family, broken once by lies, stood whole again beneath a roof they built with truth, trust, and color. And a single piece of pink chalk, forever sealed in glass, watched over it all. The ribbon cutting was set for Saturday, but Blake arrived at the center 3 days early. He walked through the nearly finished halls, the smell of fresh paint lingering in the air. Workers were still laying tile in the main studio, and sunlight poured through the massive windows, each one shaped like an artist's tool. But it was the East Wing that drew him in. The space designed for community workshops, open to anyone. Chalkboards lined the walls, and in the center of the room, a long table waited to be filled with stories. Grace met him there. They delivered the furniture early. Blake smiled. "It's beautiful." "Ella's already claimed the corner desk," Grace added. "Said it's where she'll teach the littler kids how to draw dogs." He chuckled. "Her dog still looks like a toaster with ears." "She's getting better." They stood in silence for a moment, letting the quiet speak. Then Blake said, "I want to open this place with more than scissors and speeches." Grace tilted her head. "What do you mean?" He walked to the largest chalkboard and picked up a stick of yellow chalk. "I want to invite the kids who inspired it. The ones still out there, drawing on sidewalks, unnoticed." Grace stepped forward, nodding. "Then let's find them." 2 days later, Blake returned to the same street where he first saw Ella drawing in chalk. The sidewalk buzzed with foot traffic, but tucked near a bakery wall, 3 kids huddled, coloring quietly with nubs of old chalk. He crouched beside them. "Can I join you?" The smallest one shrugged. "Sure, mister. But we're almost out." Blake smiled. "I brought backup." He unzipped his bag and pulled out a brand new set. Ella's design on the box cover, "Color Your Own Sky." Their eyes widened. One boy whispered, "These are real?" Blake nodded. "And I've got more where that came from. We're opening a place nearby, for kids who love this." He handed them a flyer, bright with drawings and shapes. Ella's Art Center. Free classes, free supplies. Just bring your imagination. The oldest girl looked up. "Is it really free?" "Yes," Blake said, "because people like you deserve a space to be seen." On opening day, the front lawn overflowed. Parents, kids, neighbors, all gathered to see the center that had grown from one small chalk drawing. Ella stood between Grace and Blake, holding the ceremonial scissors with both hands. Her voice rang clear. "I made a rainbow, and Daddy said we could color over anything." The crowd laughed warmly. Then she added, "So we did." Cheers erupted as she cut the ribbon, and families poured inside. In the workshop room, the 3 kids from the bakery were already sketching on the big chalk wall, drawing their names in looping letters. Ella walked over, handing them each a badge. "Founding Artist." They grinned. Blake stood in the doorway, soaking in the laughter, the color, the life. Grace joined him. "It's more than a building now. It's a heartbeat," Blake said. She looked at him. "You gave them that." He shook his head. "They gave it to each other. I just made room." Then Ella ran up, holding a tiny frame. "Daddy, can we hang this?" Inside was a drawing of the first day. Ella, Grace, and Blake standing in front of the building. Above their heads floated chalk hearts. Blake knelt. "Where should it go?" Ella pointed to the front wall. "Right where people walk in." He carried her in one arm, the picture in the other, and together they mounted it high. As the room filled with color and noise, that little frame watched over everyone, a silent reminder that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest lines. The festival was in full swing. Sidewalks shimmered with art. Every square filled with chalk rainbows, cityscapes, and handprints outlined in neon pinks and blues. Music played from a nearby speaker, kids danced barefoot, and laughter echoed between buildings. Ella stood near the booth marked "Color Your Own Sky," handing out chalk sets with her name on them. Her shirt was smudged with reds and greens, her cheeks glowing. Grace watched from under a canopy, smiling as Ella posed with a group of younger kids who insisted she autograph their drawings. She looked over at Blake. "She's a star," she said. Blake nodded, and she earned every bit of it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same pink chalk, now smaller, edges rounded, but still bright. "She gave me this when everything was falling apart," he said, "and somehow it held everything together." Grace looked at it, then back at Blake. "You ready to add your line to the sidewalk?" He smiled. "Only if you'll draw next to me." They stepped onto a blank patch just in front of the center. Ella ran over, holding 3 pieces of chalk, blue, yellow, and green. "We're drawing a tree," she said, "like the one at the park, but this one never loses its leaves." Blake crouched. "I like that." They worked side by side, sketching the base, the trunk, then adding branches that stretched far and wide. Around them, more families joined, doodling birds, hearts, little homes, tiny names. At the base of their tree, Ella wrote, in all capital letters, "Our Family Tree." Blake paused, tears quietly brimming. "You sure about that name?" Ella nodded. "It's not just about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays." Grace looked at Blake and whispered, "She gets that from you." He shook his head gently. "She gets it from watching us rebuild." As the sun dipped lower, the light turned golden. Kids began lighting lanterns, placing them around the sidewalk art. The glow made everything shimmer. Then the mayor stepped up to the mic. "Tonight, we recognize something rare, a project born not from profit, but from love." She gestured toward Blake, Grace, and Ella. "A father who changed his future, a mother who never gave up, and a little girl who reminded us all what matters most." The crowd clapped. Ella held both their hands, beaming. After the speech, as people packed up and the chalk dust settled, Blake knelt one last time at their drawing. He added a heart inside the trunk of the tree. Then, carefully, he pressed the worn pink chalk into the center. Ella tilted her head. "That's where it all started." Blake kissed her forehead, and where it keeps growing. They stood in silence, arms wrapped around each other, the world soft around them. Not everything had healed. Not every scar had faded. But under the festival lights on a sidewalk they once walked as strangers, a father, a mother, and a daughter had drawn their future, bold, messy, and full of color. And this time, it wasn't going anywhere.